Okay, so Dr. Goswami, Dr. Amit Goswami, I want to thank you for taking the time to be an interview subject for interviews with the leading edge. You're a quantum physicist, well-known author of many books, a professor, retired professor of physics, retired theoretical physics. You have a new book, the Everything Answer book, also, and we'll talk about a lot of things, a lot of ideas on your new book too. And so, before we delve into your work, I'm just interested in a little bit about yourself, your journey to I don't know, enlightenment or to this integration of science, spirituality, and consciousness, and how that came to be.
Well, I'll be happy to fill you in. I was born in India, which, as you know, is a spiritual country. Still, yeah, I think so. But especially
Yeah.
when I was born, it was definitely much more spiritual than today. So, and I was born in a spiritual family. So, in that way, I got a pretty early dose of spirituality. But you know what? I rebelled against it. So I actually did not like the idea that we are taking a lot of things for granted,
Hmm.
and people cannot really find much verifications of it, especially the rituals that my mother participated. I liked the food, the prasadam that they offered after the ritual, but and the stories were interesting, but it was also very clear that they were miraculous things
Hmm.
like that happen in the world. And so uh, I went into physics, science,
Uh-huh.
and became a scientific materialist.
Hmm.
So this lasted like age 14 to age 37, and then I found myself at 37, close to full professorship in the academe. So as high as you can go, but no happiness. I
Ah.
was not happy doing physics the way I was doing. It was not what I wanted to do. It did not really delve into deep questions, but very superficial questions. And you learn the trick of how to write papers, and you go ahead in the academy. That's the way it works. But what happened was that I was at a conference giving a talk, and that particular day, uh, very special thing happened in the sense that there were many speakers. Of course, I have been to conferences before, but this was the time when, perhaps because of my own unhappiness, I started looking everything negatively. I felt very jealous that others are giving better talks than me and they're getting more attention.
Hmm.
So, yeah, speaker after speaker, I would listen to them and feel jealous, feel jealous, feel jealous. Okay, that goes on, and in the evening there is a party, so I think I'll relax now. So I go to the party and get some drinks, but then the jealousy turned its face. It was now jealousy about women paying more attention to other men than me. I
Hmm.
was happy that happily married, but that was forgotten. So in this way, it just went on with this jealousy energy. And 1 o'clock in the morning, all my antacids are gone. I panic a little, so I go outside. And the place, fortunately, was near the Monterey Bay, and the ocean air comes and hit my face. And I have this thought, completely unexpected. Why do I live this way? And with that came the conviction that I don't have to. I can actually find happy physics to do and be happy again.
Hmm.
So began the quest for happy physics and happiness.
Ah. So in a way, it was a mystical experience.
It was kind of, yes.
Yeah, yeah, or an epiphany. So, and that led you onto the path of looking at using your science background and physics, quantum physics, and kind of I don't know, looking back, but integrating from your childhood and that spiritual experience you had, and taking your work in a new direction. Is that
Yes, of
yeah?
course, I was a materialist, so I was still very reluctant to believe anything of my childhood. That happened, this was 1973, and then for 12 years I searched, found quantum physics, and that brought consciousness, the idea of consciousness getting into physics in my life. But what is consciousness? I still couldn't look at the spiritual model of consciousness at all, because that still seemed like humbug. Because, you know, they all say there is oneness, but we look at ourselves and it's all separateness. And I could not entertain the idea that there is anything more than the space-time reality and matter movement reality. This is the reality for me. So the question that we faced in quantum physics was that obviously the observer, when the observer looks, although the brain is supposed to be material, but somehow the observer must have something special. John von Neumann, a great physicist, already suggested that it must be observer's consciousness which is doing the job, but consciousness has to be non-material, otherwise consciousness also would obey the rules of quantum physics, and then there is no, what we call, collapse of the wave into particle, because in quantum physics objects are waves, but when the observer observes, waves become particle. That's the idea.
Right.
But it was a huge standoff, because if brain is material object, brain itself also is a wave before measurement takes place. How can wave looking at wave collapse as a wave? It's not possible. And this is the mathematical theorem of quantum physics. Von Neumann himself proved it. So I knew that, and just butting your head against impossible. And that went on for years. And then one day I was talking to a mystic, Joel Morrod, and we got into a sort of argument. And at one point he told me that you have scientific blinder on your head, and that insulted me kind of. I felt very enraged. And so I also started giving, saying things like, you just don't understand, that usual scorn that we have for non-scientists, at least I did at that time, that, non-scientists will just never get it. And I started explaining things again. He stops me and he shouts at me, because now he is also a bit angry, and shouts at me like that old saying, there is nothing but God, meaning that there is only consciousness. But of course I had heard it before and made no sense to me. I rejected it completely. How can that be? Because we are separate. There is no unity consciousness that we can see, we can verify. How can that be? All of a sudden, I felt like, a prisoner in Plato's cave, that allegory that I can only look forward and strap to the chair. And all of a sudden, like, the straps are free and I could look at the back. And then I see that the shadow show that is being cast on the wall in front of me actually is being cast by objects behind me and the light that is projecting it. So I see the whole thing. Consciousness is doing it from another domain of reality. The domain where waves of potentiality are. This was right in front of me and right in front of everybody. Nobody was seeing it. This is the excuse I have for not seeing it. It's funny how you get prejudice. The mathematics of quantum physics clearly says that the waves of possibility that objects are, they must reside in a domain outside of space and time, and that domain is characterized by signal-less communication, which means that that domain is instantly interconnected. And it just never occurred to me that instant interconnection means oneness. Everything is one in that domain. It's so funny. And in that moment, I could see that, yes, oneness, and yes, consciousness is the ground of being, matter is possibilities of consciousness, and there is no paradox. So all the paradoxes were solved right there in my mind.
And is that when you went on to write your book, The Self-Aware Universe, from there? Yeah. So and that's been the central tenet of your work all along as you've branched out. Consciousness is the ground of all being, the central fabric of the universe. And you make such a strong case, and it's influenced a lot of people, myself included, and yet most scientists, many scientists, don't subscribe to that worldview and think this is wacky. Why do you think that is? Why do scientists have a problem with this?
Well, the people who can judge it, understand it and judge it, they're physicists. And for their world, it works. The old Newtonian worldview works. For physics and chemistry, consciousness is the ground of being. That realization makes no difference in how you do physics. So that's the problem. Whereas people who like this idea of consciousness, they belong to medical field, but they don't understand quantum physics. They're very hard-pressed to judge it. They won't take the time out to try and understand it. See, if you're a scientist, you feel a responsibility. You're too intelligent to say, like, oh, I tried and I don't understand it. You cannot say that because that will demean yourself. So it's much better to ignore something that you like in principle, but you keep it a hush-hush because you don't want to take the time to read it. And this is, I have talked to many people in person, and then they say, of course, we agree, especially types, personal psychologists and alternative medicine healers, you know, they would readily agree, oh, that's very interesting. But they still would not read it because nobody has the time anymore to take something that seriously. The people who take seriously are, of course, people who are into personal growth. For them, this is great because they're getting support for their spiritual search. And people who want to change, the people who want to change the world, they too are greatly admiring it. So we have many, many, many quantum activists in the world, but the scientists are not particularly among them. But many, many psychologists and medical professionals, they are.
Yeah.
So we are doing fine. And neuroscientists are gradually coming along because, you know, I mean, it's a major problem of the brain now, how to explain the cells. And most brain scientists, especially the young ones, know that scientific materialism is completely helpless to explain the self, especially free-willing self. And the idea of free will is more and more gaining traction because they find evidence for it. You know, Benjamin Libet started the evidence back in 1985, but now I just was at a neuroscience conference recently. These young neuroscientists tell me, yeah, we are not siding with the old guys. The old guys still pretend as if Newtonian worldview works for the brain, but it doesn't. We know that.
Yeah, so that they don't. So the old saying, "Paradigms die funeral by funeral." So they're saying they're ready to move on to this new way of understanding.
Yeah, it's more or less that way. I mean, post-materialist science is here to stay. The problem with the post-materialist science as it is growing is that because consciousness involves so many fields, you know, quantum physics, and then we get into psychology and biology, and then medicine. These are the fields. And of course, then if you take social sciences, then you get lots of fields. But quantum physics is foreign to all these fields, and that posits a problem. So nobody wants to invest in the quantum knowledge until somebody authoritarian says, or many authoritarian people says that, look, this is a grand way of doing it. But you know, we cannot do mathematics in this field. That's the whole idea. The whole idea is that the mathematics of quantum physics doesn't apply to non-physical stuff. The mathematics you have developed does not apply. Are there non-physical bodies? Now, there are much agreement about this. Rupert Sheldrake started it in biology, and the transpersonal psychology started in psychology. So that part goes through. But the experts cannot settle on one model. They're still searching for the ultimate discovery coming to their own name, and you know, the usual Western competitiveness of scientists. That prevents a whole lot of people to see that the model of life, consciousness, all these things already has been developed, and we could all unite and do it this way. But that will take time. So, you know, you have to be patient.
Yeah. So one other question on this, on your central tenet of your work about consciousness being the central fabric of the universe, the ground of all being, and that is, what would you say, I mean, this is an obvious answer for you, but for people watching this, what is the importance of this understanding that consciousness is the ground of all being?
Well, very simple. I mean, I will go through the arguments again. Say quantum physics says something that is now absolutely well known. I think non-scientists even know that. Objects are possibilities. They are waves of possibility. And then, as I said, these waves of possibility cannot be waves in space and time, because in space and time, possibilities cannot exist, cannot be measurable. We measure everything at a definite position. So in space and time, the wave objects, which spreads out, that's the whole idea of being a wave, they become particles. They can be localized in one place. That's how we see it. When we look at an electron, in mathematics, quantum mathematics, they're spread out all over. But when I actually look in a space-time with a space-time apparatus like a Geiger counter, only one of the Geiger counters, of the many Geiger counters that I can set up in a room, only one will tick, which means that our measurement converts the wave into a particle. Particles are always localized. Waves are always spread out. Mm-hmm. So this is the beginning of the proof. And then Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, those three guys became famous by suggesting that, look, this suggestion of quantum physics is very dangerous, because if this is the case, then two objects can interact. And if they interact, then they will become one, like this domain itself is one. They will become one in space and time, potentially. Mm-hmm. And that can be measured, because if we get two observers measuring these objects, even though they're at a distance, galaxies apart, even then they will have this oneness, instant communication. Does that actually happen? Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen wrote their paper in 1935. In 1982, lo and behold, Alain Aspect, a physicist in France, and his group, they verified, yes, it does happen. Objects are able to communicate instantly. How can that happen? It can only happen through this domain of potentiality, where everything is interconnected at once. Mm-hmm. No signals are needed for communication. So we call that domain of non-locality. Locality is in space and time, signals are needed, whereas non-locality is where no local signals are needed. So this is the proof of oneness. And then quantum measurement theory, that's what I did. I showed that the oneness has to be consistent, because the observer is crucial. Without the observer, you cannot measure these quantum objects. They will forever remain as objects of potentiality. Measurement forces them to become particles as the forms that we see. So what is then to be recognized? Consciousness is ground of being, very important, but to be expressed, to be manifested, consciousness must use material to manifest itself. Uh-huh. Especially the brain, that has a special thing in it which captures consciousness, prisons consciousness, you might say. That's how mystics express it. Brain is a prison.
Mm-hmm. So you've taken your work and explaining the world of consciousness, the world of our world of potentialities, and taken it from the theoretical into our everyday world. You've described yourself as a quantum activist. Is that a fair label for yourself?
Absolutely, because I realized that activists are there all the time, and we need activism in physics because nobody is listening that these problems have been solved. They sound too risque to them because they sound mystical, and science divorced from religion and spirituality 400 years ago, and they don't want to go back to that. Sort of a historical remnant of something for which the time has come to give up. But, still, it takes time. It just takes time. So people are not ready for that yet. And this is why you have to do activism. But quantum activism is very different than ordinary activism. Mm-hmm. It is true. We are conceding from the get-go that, look, the quantum principles look very peculiar to ordinary people, non-scientists. Non-locality. Signalless communication. This one at least is a little bit acceptable because people are familiar with telepathy. That's mental, but still, it's non-local, no signal. People are communicating each other mentally instantly. So telepathy, people have experienced much more, and therefore they're a little bit soft towards telepathy. So non-locality is easy. But then the second quantum concept that is absolutely a must to understand is discontinuity. Now, very few people experience discontinuity. Creative people do, because creativity has a portion of it which is called a discontinuous sudden insight. Aha! People get a surprise. And that surprise gives away the idea that it's discontinuous from all previous thought. You're being surprised by this new thought. But only creative people have that experience, and not everybody. Of course, the majority of people are not so creative. They never experience a quantum leap in their life, so it's very difficult to relate to it. Of course, now we have discovered the creative process, so my point is that, look, okay, you have never experienced it before, but now is the time. It's never too late to learn. It's very easy to learn, and once you do it, you will see that discontinuity is a wonderful way to transform your unhappiness away and be happy again. So, and then there is a third principle, which where the brain comes in, and that's crucial for the brain, but it tells us something. Usually, you and I, when we relate, unbeknownst to us, because of our brain, because of the way material world is built, we make a hierarchy. I have a hierarchy inside of me that, you are important because you are interviewing me. You have a hierarchy inside of you which says, I am important only because you need a subject to interview, and that's my importance. So we have a simple hierarchy where each one of us regard the other one as instrumental to my desires, my wish. So this is the way we operate, and this creates all these isms that we worry about: sexism, racism, gay, that kind of thing. So we have all those isms against people. We separate. Though these people are not acceptable, we are superior to them. So that has to give way to this way that brain works. If the brain worked that way, we could not manifest consciousness in the brain. Brain works in a different way. Brain has a tangled hierarchy. Tangled hierarchies are special. Circularity comes in. Both of the levels of the hierarchy creates each other. Both are important. Both have the same causal power over the other. I create you, but you also create me. Not the other way. In the other way, you create me and I create you. Both of us think that way. But in the quantum way, we create each other. This gives us the basic participatory fabric of the world. This is the fabric, participatory. We participate, co-creating each other, co-creating the world and me, co-creating all the polarities, two sides of the polarity that exist. When we look in this co-creational way, then we have found complete integration of science and spirituality, complete integration of our quantum self and the ego self, the unity self and the separate self, even complete integration of other things like male, female, races. Nothing is difficult anymore. And that is the idea that has to eventually go into the society. In that order, non-locality is easiest, then discontinuity, and then once you are familiar with discontinuity, go for the final quantum principle and live that. Tangled.
Yeah. So would you say a quantum activist uses the tools, as you're mentioning, of quantum thinking or quantum creativity to put themselves out in the world?
And then they exemplify that, because these principles are so hard to comprehend, and then people need faith to actually get into them. Of course, faith can come from the experimental data. There's plenty of data for creative aha experience. There's plenty of data for non-locality. Non-locality is very established, so that's the easiest for application. But discontinuity, as I said, it's hard for people. But still, if people can be persuaded to look at the data, so at least people who come to colleges, we are trying to get into high school too, the idea of creativity. If it is possible, then many more people will become creative. And so discontinuity, I think, will become familiar to people within another decade or so. Tangled hierarchy will take a long time. But ultimately, we have to have that. I mean, witness the political situation in this country. Again, it's going towards very blatant simple hierarchy. Right now, we have a very blatant simple hierarchy tendency. Russia and Turkey already has favored simple hierarchy, dictatorship, that kind of thing. So we are very close to getting to that. So it is imperative that we listen to the message of quantum physics and reverse that and get into the spirit of democracy, which intuitively captured the tangled hierarchical spirit of the new worldview. That we elect, like Lincoln used to say, government of the people, by the people, for the people. So we elect our representative to serve them, but representatives also serve us. So that is the way democracy can work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and one other thing about the quantum creativity, you used the work of M.C. Escher as one example of discontinuity to help people.
Especially tangled hierarchy. Because left hand creates the right hand and right hand creates the left hand. That's the tangled hierarchy.
Right. Right. So, so in a little while, since you brought up politics and you've delved into that and you write on your blog, your website too, but I want to talk about your new book, the new book that came out just recently, the Everything Answer book, How Quantum Physics Explains Love, Death, and the Meaning of Life. So that is Everything Answer. So I'm first curious how this book came to be written.
Well, that's an interesting story. I had an invitation from a group in Japan who said that there is no translation of my work in Japanese. So they want to change that, and they would like to produce a new book where I and a philosopher businessman speak for 2 whole days, and after that I give a workshop to raise money, of course, and they pay me some money too. I mean, that's the other part of the deal. But this book deal was that I come and I talk to this philosopher businessman for 2 whole days, and they videotape it, and then we go from there and get a book of that conversation. So we did that. It was delightful because I had to speak to a businessman who was very intelligent, but not a quantum physicist, not at all an expert. So I had to really use imagery and words that made sense to him. And also, Japanese language is so different. Although he spoke very good English, but still, if you are trained in a language which is very different than the structure of English, then you would have some of that habit of that language. So that communication difficulty, we had to really work hard to overcome it. But we did, because we really communicated well. And I was very pleased with what happened. And the book they published was successful in Japan. So from that, when I contacted my publisher, they showed interest. But they said that, no, I have to rewrite it in the regular form, which Americans like. They don't like conversational books. So I did this, adding some more things, and that's the result. And I'm glad I did that, because this is the simplest I could ever write. And I hope I get to write more books of this kind, because, when I talk to people, I become much more simple to understand. And when I write by myself, then again, the old habit of explaining everything in the proper way, proper scientific way, that old habit comes in. And so, the language, the imagery becomes a little bit stiff. Whereas in the conversational style, like we're talking now, have I said anything that is difficult to understand?
Oh. Well, that's interesting. I've read a number of your books and I've enjoyed them all. So this one was a little more chatty, conversational. I mean, you still gave scientific understandings behind it, but you delved into realms. I'm not sure if in other books you've really delved into more. You delved into consciousness, life, death, God. psychology and the meaning of life. So you really showed the applicability of quantum physics in these realms.
Yes, yes, it's very simple. I mean, we should touch upon it because there may be some listeners who have science background. Scientists worry too much about the fact that how can, a science that was discovered and applied in connection with submicroscopic objects, when you take that science and apply it to macroscopic world, they get worried. Because in the macro world, of course, Newtonian physics holds. I mean, it's approximately correct. And this is why scientific materialists still hold on to the Newtonian worldview, because their belief is that at the macro level, this is the right way to do it. Quantum physics and its subtleties all disappear at the macro level. Of course, that is not correct, for consciousness is the ground of being. That argument stands anyway. But they just ignore it. Okay, there is a little bit of difficulty here, we ignore it. Okay, but even the macro level, what they're doing is not correct. This is where my work comes in, because from the get-go, I realized that with quantum view, we can include non-material objects, not only consciousness, which is the ground of being, but also non-material vital energies. Rupert Sheldrake already tried to do that in biology. I took that and converted into in a quantum context. And then mind, which other people are already saying that mind has to be quantum, starting with David Bohm. And then mind cannot be processed by matter. That work was done in the 80s by John Searle and Roger Penrose. So I took all these works from these three people, Rupert Sheldrake, John Searle, and Penrose, and put it in the quantum frame of reference. As soon as I did that, immediately the macro world becomes quantum, because the vital and the mental, they're quantum. There is no doubt about it. David Bohm started the proof, and Chinese have known that for millennia. And experimentally, it's very easy to establish that, because this non-locality and discontinuity, those things work also for these domains of reality. Mental telepathy, for example. So obviously, mind can have telepathy, non-local communication, then mind has to be quantum. Mm-hmm. So in this way, there is now very good proof that, yes, macro world is quantum, not because material is quantum, but because mind and vital is correlated with the material, like brain has a vital counterpart and a mental counterpart, our body organs have a vital counterpart, and it's the vital counterpart that makes the body organs, even a single living cell, into a quantum object. And same thing with the brain. Brains are different apparatuses of the brain, they're quantum objects, not because of the material, but because of the vital and the mental connection. Mm-hmm. So people have to come to terms with that, because there is enormous evidence. The world fits if we do that.
And I've seen probably one of the few sciences that has integrated quantum into quantum understandings into the work is the field of quantum chaos. They understand it to some degree, but as you're saying, biology or chemistry, some of the other sciences don't really get it. But but as you eloquently articulate, and this Everything Answer book, you could say that quantum physics is a theory of everything. Is that what you're getting at with that title, the Everything Answer book?
Yes, everything that we basically experience, human beings at this stage of their evolution, generally experience 4 types of experiences. Sensing is the lowest one, that's how we experience matter. Then we have feeling, that we experience vital energies. And then we have thinking, we experience the mind. And then we have intuition. And there we experience archetypes like love, beauty, justice, truth, abundance, these things. So these 4 experiences, quantum physics is adequate for explaining it. Quantum physics is also adequate to explain our inner self, the self-experience that we have beyond the ego. Ego is, of course, more like an object, but this inner self, the self-experience that people have when they're expanded, there you see your freedom very, very easily. You see your creative freedom. And so that is not an object, that is a subject. You get to know you as an I. Ordinary people, they just refer to the I, but they know very well that I is a me because they take care of the me. I doesn't need anybody's taking care of because I is the observer of the world. I looks at the world separate from itself. But that I is cosmic. It has that remnant of that cosmic consciousness from which it came. And so to the goal of the human being, the meaning of the human being is to engage in things such that we can explain we can experience the I-ness that we also have. Transpersonal psychologists call this transpersonal self, and spiritual traditions call this the innermost self. Quantum physics, we call it quantum self. So how do we go towards the quantum self and leave the me behind? The me that everybody gets confused about. What is in it for me? Transaction, that kind of way of living. I discovered that that's what was making me unhappy. And then you move towards I, you become happier and happier because you are subject now. You are experiencing the world now. World is important to you. And then you don't feel that selfishness, what is in it for me, every time you relate to someone. You can relate to someone from the viewpoint of both. What is important for him? What is important for her? And that's what improves the relationship with the world, and you become happier and happier because of that expansion of consciousness.
And you would say this expansion of consciousness is the path towards becoming a quantum activist.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, quantum activist exemplifies that expansion. You come in touch with a quantum activist who is into personal growth. I mean, look, it's just a name, okay? We are using quantum principles, so we call ourselves quantum activists. But actually, all spiritual practitioners are quantum activists. They just don't use the term because they use methods which goes by different names, like meditation. We see that meditation really consists of many stages, many types, and it's really the creative process. So we have done some scientific categorization of ancient methods that ancient people already used. So I'm not claiming that, we are bringing a whole bunch of originality. No, these views existed. It's a continually developing science for, let's say, 3,000 to 5,000 years old. But we have now, with our classification and scientific way of looking at it, we have made some definite progress. Before, people sort of blindly went into it. They didn't know what they're doing because all they had was, okay, you meditate. So some people kind of perseverant and all that, resilient and all that, they, in spite of the ups and downs, somehow they broke through. But very few. Whereas now, we know the process. We know that we have to use the creative process. It has stages, and we do these stages, and we get to the outcome. Now it is much more tractable. And this is why I'm very hopeful that we can change the transactional way of the world to a transformational way of living.
Yeah, and you've done a wonderful job in helping light the way. So going back to the Everything Answer book, one of the early chapters was very curious to me. I read it very interested because I've been a fan or a student of Zen. So you had a chapter called Zen and Quantum Physics, and I had to scratch my head before reading and say, now what does Zen have to do with quantum physics? So perhaps you could say a little on that.
Well, I myself was very attracted to Zen, perhaps because it is a bit puzzling how there's a spiritual tradition talk in riddles, almost seem like talk in riddles. And, I'll tell you some of the intriguing riddles that I pondered and pondered and pondered, that eventually found the quantum solution. And I said, oh my God, this is great. One of them is like, what is the sound of one hand clapping?
Mm-hmm.
What is the sound of one hand clapping? Do you see the quantum in it? What is the sound?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
There is the possibility before actuality happens.
Mm-hmm.
So sound of one hand clapping is possibility. So, but that took a while to recognize it, that it is very quantum. Zen is very quantum. Another one of the similar real case, what was your name before you were born? You think a while and you realize, oh, my name was possibility. And then it was actualized in the particular name, Michael. But before it was Michael, I went by many other names.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, that kind of thing. So it is very nice. Even I cite a story from Zen which illustrates the two self polarity, that we have a inner quantum self which is alive and which is conscious of the unity, and then we have this ego which is me-centered and selfish. There is a Zen story which tells that so beautifully, the polarity of ourselves. The two monks are crossing a little river which you can walk through, but the river is very muddy because it's rainy season, I guess. A beautiful girl comes with a beautiful dress, and she is hesitating. Mm-hmm. So one of the monks says, you need help? She says, yes. And he just picks her up and takes her to the other shore and moves on. The other guy, of course, follows the two. But this other guy gets a little upset because monks are not supposed to touch a woman. Mm-hmm. So after 1 hour, he can't hold this anger in himself anymore. He speaks up. He said, brother, you did something very wrong. Do you understand what you did? The other one says, what? And this guy says, you picked up a woman. You're not supposed to touch a woman. What have you done? And the other guy says, brother, you are still carrying the woman. I carried her only for a minute. So this guy is working out of quantum cells. This other guy is stuck in the ego. Mm-hmm. It's so beautifully illustrated.
Yeah. And then another, you talk about, well, in this book, the Everything Answer book, and also in your book, The Quantum Doctor, relation between quantum physics and biology and medicine. So what would you say, biology just, for strict biologists, they can't see where quantum physics would have any relationship to their work, but you've written and helped bridge a gap. So what would you say about that relationship between quantum physics and biology?
Well, it's a shame that people are so afraid of quantum physics. Even biologists, they really should not be afraid because they do get quantum physics, a little bit of quantum physics in college. They have to. In their chemistry classes, they do get. Unfortunately, they don't really, the educational system has become such that you don't teach meaning of the physics, you teach only the mechanisms of the physics. So what happens in our education is that they learn to use some of the quantum language, but they really don't get the essence of quantum physics. And this is a problem. So there is this huge problem of what is life. Niels Bohr, I read Niels Bohr a lot because he was one of the founding fathers of quantum physics. Niels Bohr used to compare a living cell and a dead cell. Living cell just died an instant before death and instant after death. Just think about it. The molecular content is exactly the same. Nothing has changed. From a molecular point of view, nothing has changed. But there is obviously a huge change. So what has changed? This was what Niels Bohr thought. He felt that there is something quantum in this. And that is what I discovered. What is lacking is that vital energy is now disassociated from the material. So what makes a living cell alive are two things. One is that it has manifested consciousness. It has manifested its separateness from the rest of the world. It has become a subject, just like quantum measurement in the brain. So quantum measurement also occurs in the living cell. And second of all, vital energy these programs of life. The molecules of life, there's a big difference between them and the molecules of non-life. Molecules of non-life has no programs, but molecules of life carry out programmed activity. Everybody knows about the genetic program, which is necessary to build the protein, but we don't realize that proteins also are performing programs, purposeful programs. Living is purposeful. Some proteins are necessary for me to lift a hand so that I can use a fork to feed myself. If those proteins were not purposive, how could I do that? It's the proteins that allows me to do this kind of thing. So every protein has purposive programs built into it, just like the DNA has purposive program of building the protein built into it. So in this way, who builds the purposive programs into the molecules, into the living matter? Of course, consciousness does through something that is very similar to mind, and Rupert Sheldrake gave a name to it, morphogenetic field, and this is the nature of the vital world. Yeah. And the fields are quantum. This is now, even experimental biologists have found this already. They find that the programs that guide how the genes will activate in an organ, those programs are not genetic, they are epigenetic, outside of the genes. So basic idea that Sheldrake had, that there must be outside fields, not genetic, non-genetic field. And Sheldrake went one step further, which of course many biologists do not agree because they're materialists, saying that these fields are non-physical. And of course, that there is the secret. They have to be non-physical because only if they're non-physical, they can be quantum, and that gives life its quantum nature. There's no doubt that life is quantum because, again, non-locality exists. We know that even single cells, we can communicate with them non-locally. And is that possible if they are not quantum? It's just not possible. So, there's plenty of evidence. The evolution is another evidence of the quantum nature of life. There's just so much evidence, Michael.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right, Amit. And so your books. I mean, as I stated, I've read a number of your books. Have been very inspiring to me and helped me figure my own thought process. But there's a progression in your books from with the central tenet of consciousness being the ground of all being into your work, quantum activism and politics, quantum politics, and that will be our last stop. But before that, along the way of your books, you wrote a book, Creative Evolution, and you integrated the work of the philosophers Sri Aurobindo and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin regarding the future of humanity. So I'm interested, and those writers interest me. But what is the importance of their work? What do you think is the importance of their work?
It's tremendous. One thing that the spiritual traditions, and I'm not talking about religion, of course they lack in their basic understanding, but the spiritual traditions were founded by very great people. Buddha, Jesus, they were absolutely the greatest brains, the greatest geniuses of their time. There is no doubt about it. The impact they have left, our Nobel laureates today, except for Einstein, pale in front of these great masters of consciousness. So these people missed something very, very important. They missed evolution. So Aurobindo and they recaptured evolution as an aspect of consciousness. Mystics discovered consciousness in its non-local aspect. Mystics discovered consciousness in the unity aspect 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. But they did not discover evolution. So Darwin and others, Lamarck, who even before Darwin suggested evolution, and these scientists then have done a very good job in suggesting that yes, there is evolution. Of course, their mistake was not Lamarck so much, but Darwin's mistake was to stay within materialism. But he couldn't do any better. At that time, the time was not ready yet. Quantum physics would take another 50 years to be discovered. So Darwin did what he did. Aurobindo and Tisharta, they noticed Darwin's work, they were impressed by it, they realized there is evolution, and they then made a theory of evolution in terms of evolution of consciousness. The evolution on the basis of consciousness is the ground of being. How would evolution look like? There, from a scientific point of view, so he made a big point that, look, phenomenon of man, this must be addressed. Man is different. Man progresses. Man makes future evolution too. And what will be the future of man? We now have mind. The future of man must be to create heaven on earth. That was Thayer's work. So the next step would be what Aurobindo calls supramental. These archetypes, love, beauty, justice, truth, will embody them. And when you embody them, heaven will happen on this very earth. Yeah. That's Thayer's work. Beautiful.
Yeah. No, totally beautiful. And so, and then we fast forward to present day, and you continue to write and think and speak, so well. And so I noticed that, and you've taken the ideas, quantum activism. And so I noticed an article that you wrote, talking about our present day, and you called it Quantum Politics, What Trump's Election is About, and What It Means to the Future of Democracy. So what do you think Trump's election does mean for the future of democracy?
It's forcing us to look at ourselves, of our view of ourselves, creating democracy, and then the challenges that we have to face if we want to make a democratic society. It's not easy. Our founding fathers were tremendously advanced people of their time. I would compare them with Jesus Christ, but Thomas Jefferson stands very high in my estimation of himself. I mean, this is a fantastic man. And Madison and those people, all of them, Washington, they all were very developed people. And so they saw a vision before their time, and they wrote a constitution which has ever since inspired other people to write similar constitutions. Although I think that there are mistakes in it, of course. Electoral college, we didn't anticipate that it would be such a heavy baggage now. But, on the whole, the ideals are fantastic. All men are created equal. Okay, you modify it a little bit. All people are created equal now, but okay, they made little mistakes. But it's wonderful. And government of the people, by the people, for the people, which became almost part of the Constitution. And then the whole idea of why democracy? Why liberty? Liberty is for the pursuit of happiness. I mean, what other than idealism would give such ideas that liberty is not because I want to prove my superiority over others, but it is for the pursuit of happiness, how we can become happy. And of course, the best way to become happy for us is to recognize that we have unity consciousness, the wholeness and happiness come together. So the founding fathers had those insights. Of course, they gave us representative democracy, which is not perfect. Without transformation of people, it cannot be. So Trump's election is telling us that, look, we have not bothered. We have not bothered to transform because the Democrats, half of our country, became scientific materialists. So for them, they thought we can legalize unity. How? Because they developed a concept called political correctness. It's not politically correct to call somebody nigger. And that's their antidote to racism. No, racism is not that easy to handle. You have to transform yourself. You really have to feel. You have to be in the other people's shoes, how they suffer from your racism, and transform. And of course, some liberals are very transformed people, and some conservatives are very transformed people too. So there are transformed people. I'm not suggesting that they're not. But the more of the society becomes one of rebellion because, look, we cannot be politically correct. I don't feel that way. I'm not transformed. So something is shoved down your throat and people don't like it. That's certainly an infringement on their liberty. And this is part of the reason that Trump got elected. He sounded more authentic. Of course, his authenticity goes almost towards craziness that people did not realize. But, that is again, these are quirkiness of things. But what is the lesson for us? Lesson is to show that the way we are going, scientific materialism, is creating complete disaster. 10 years ago, we had economic breakdown, and now 10 years later, we are having political breakdown. If this does not wake people up, what will? Because this breakdown, this is not going to stop here. The polarization of the two worldviews, the religious feudal worldview of the Republicans and the scientific materialism worldview of the Democrats, this polarization cannot stay, cannot last, because it will destroy the country. And Americans are not foolish. The one strength of America is that it's a very pragmatic country. And that pragmatism will take hold, and they will find that there is already a worldview in place. This is why I work so hard. I want everything to be already tackled. Economics, politics, everything to be already there. Look, we have solutions to everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for working so hard. And you wrote a book, Quantum Economics, and you've co-founded a quantum economics business coaching. So you're also taking your solutions into the economic field. And for all of us quantum activists to put these ideas forth and push tangled hierarchies and discontinuities and all this to change the way we think and the way we do business and the way our world goes. So it was so relevant that you wrote that article, Quantum Politics and What the Future of Democracy Is under our current leadership. And what do you see next for you? Where do you have a vision where you're taking your work, or it's just continually progressing organically? And
there are a couple of omissions. I have not written a book of the brain, so I'm working very hard to write two books. One is quantum psychology, and one is quantum neuroscience. So those two books are finished. I'll publish a book just before the next election, so that the Trump fiasco never happens again, called Quantum Politics.
Oh, great. I look forward to that. Oh, and if people want more information about your work, what's the best way to see what you're doing? Website?
Yes, the website is the place to go. AmitGoswami.org. AmitGoswami.org.
Okay. Well, and I'll put the website right under you. So amitgoswami.org, and right there they can see your work, your books, your ideas, the trailer.
They can even write me an email. I answer every email meticulously.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful that you really are a great correspondent. So Amit, Dr. Amit Goswami, I thank you so much for taking the time. You're an inspiration to many people, and your writings are really a clear light that helps show us the right way to continue in our world in a sane, healthy, and happy way, and enlightened way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.